Billy Bragg, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Bernard.
Your book, The Progressive Patriot, and seems like half of your 1980s, 90s output is particularly relevant again, if it ever was not relevant.
Yeah.
Why is it still topical? Why is the things that you were singing about
Well, you know, in the
1980s,
I wrote a lot about left-wing issues, about socialism. Once the Berlin Wall comes down, that kind of starts to disappear, and ideology starts to disappear. And what replaces it for a lot of people, I think, is identity politics. And my writing about English and British identity was inspired in many ways by the rise of a far-right, a racist whites-only party called the British National Party. Because I was politicised by Rock Against Racism, so my antenna have always been, you know, able to pick up those kind of social trends. And of course, what's happened since then is, you know, the idea of sort of nationalism has taken hold across the United States of America and right across Europe as well, in my country, in the form of Brexit. So in the context of that, the difference of the British identity and the English identity are now going to be clear again if the Scots, as they are suggesting, are going to try for another independence referendum. The Irish are going to have to resolve the issue of a border between the North and the South. So the English are going to really have to look in the mirror and work out who they are. So many of the things, as you say, that I have written about over the past couple of decades are coming into focus again.
The Progressive Patriot addressed the issue of England in particular as a nation of many cultures for centuries, and as a place where cultures came and expanded. Yeah. You've got another book coming which touches on some of those same issues. Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I've another book on the issue of skiffle, which is a relatively obscure period in our cultural history when young men, and it probably predominantly was, in fact, it was often boys. I mean, it was schoolboys. Suddenly got this craze for playing what, for want of a better word, I would describe as Leadbelly's repertoire and other things associated with that. Inspired in 1956 by Lonnie Donegan having a hit with Rock Island Line, Leadbelly's song Rock Island Line. But that in itself was a culmination of a sort of a search for both authenticity in music that had been led by people wanting to play New Orleans jazz, to get away from the boring crooners in the charts and how much is that dog in the window. But also a generation of the first generation actually of teenagers in the UK who were trying to create their own culture, because basically at the time pop music in the UK was an adult oriented jazz-based music that relied on really album sales and show tunes. And there wasn't really any music for teenagers on the radio at all. There was novelty songs for kids, and then there was adult music. And likewise, in terms of fashion and culture, there was kid stuff, and then you were a young adult. And what happens is that in '55, the first generation of kids born during the Second World War leave school. And they leave school at a time when there's a lot of money about. And they start buying cosmetics, they start buying clothes, they start buying records. And the teenager, as we know it, in my country, starts to define himself and herself, and skiffle is the first music that they not only latch onto, but they're making it themselves. And what's significant about this is that it wasn't handed down to them by adults. It wasn't something that, like all the other pop in the UK, came out of Tin Pan Alley. These kids were really gripped by something that Donegan was doing. And if you listen to the Rock Island Line now, you'll guess exactly what he was doing. He was singing out of tune. He was playing faster and faster and faster as the record got on. And he was making music that sounded really, really accessible. And when it transpired that he didn't come from the Mississippi Delta, but he actually came from East Ann, then a really, really big penny dropped for British youth. And the message that they understood then was that you don't have to be a musician to make music, and you don't have to be an American to sing American songs. And from that idea, everything flows. You know, the Beatles, the Stones, the folk boom, really everything goes back to this kind of seminal moment when skiffle says more or less exactly what punk rock said to my generation. Here's 3 chords, now form a group.
So the idea of Britain as a place that brings in culture, exports it in a way maybe back to the people that it drew from. It's generations old now.
Yeah.
So that history repeating is interesting.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of history repeating, which you touched on at the beginning about the repetition of right-wing, racist-based thinking, the fact that that's happening now, does it tire you that you're having to fight this fight again, or does it invigorate you that there is a fight?
Those people never go away, Bernard, unfortunately. I wish they did. I wish I could say we beat them when we beat the National Front in '76, or we beat them when we destroyed the BNP in Barking and Dagenham in 2010. But those people never go away. They're like those bacteria in your gut that are always there and come out from time to time. And unfortunately, calling a referendum on the European Union at a time when people feel that their voice is not heard, allowed an anti-foreigner aspect of the Brexit vote to come to the fore and talk about controlling borders and stuff like that, when really I think it's really that people want to be heard at Westminster. I think that the Brexit vote was really an anti-Westminster vote. It was a vote against the centre rather than a vote against Brussels. It's just that people piled in everything they hated about Brussels and had the opportunity to kick Cameron in the arse and took it. And if you look at, the election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, that was an anti-Westminster vote. It was against the way the Labour Party had been turned into New Labour. The Scottish referendum, the last Scottish referendum, didn't quite win, but again, that was against Westminster. And at the start of it all, the 2010 election, which failed to give any party a majority, that also was a vote against the centre. So this has been going on really since the crash in 2008. And the European Union is not going to solve those problems that people have about jobs going overseas in the UK, about there not being enough housing for their children to live in locally, about the age gap, for the possibilities for young people. Because Brexit, the biggest division in the Brexit vote is between old people and young people around the age of 35. Although interestingly, the really old people who could remember the Second World War voted to remain in Europe because they remember why the European Union was set up in the first place. It's unfortunately my generation in between who've forgotten all that stuff, who voted, kind of lashed out. And our average general election averages around 65% turnout. The referendum had an 85% turnout. So a lot of people went in there and voted, I think voted in anger. Now, I'm not to say their anger is not justified, but I would say that had they really thought through the ramifications of leaving the European Union, they may have thought again, because they're the sort of people who will be very disappointed if the United Kingdom does split up and Scotland does become independent and Northern Ireland has to change its relationship with the Republic because of the Republic being in the EU and Northern Ireland being out. It changes the nature of what Britain is. They were probably, I don't think the majority of people were thinking about that when they went into the voting booth to vote to leave the European Union.
It wouldn't appear that there's an obvious connection between the most recent album you did with Joe Henry, train-related songs, and then this tour playing those songs. But in fact, those songs are quite enmeshed in the same.
I think they are, because when we were on tour playing them last year during the American election, and Trump talking about his wall, and at the same time, there's a lot of talk in the UK about economic migrants in the Calais jungle, where they're trying to get through the Channel Tunnel. All these songs are about hobos, and a hobo is just a romantic term for an economic migrant. When Woody Guthrie was trying to get out the Dust Bowl into California, there were vigilantes on the road trying to turn them back. There were state troopers on the California state line saying you can't come in if you haven't got a job. What does that remind you of? And they were ended up the camps that those people lived in. If you read Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck's great book, the description of the camp is very similar to the Calais jungle, except it's canvas and now it's plastic they're living in. But those people are economic migrants. So I think in the end, these train songs are still very, very relevant today.
The song you played is a song that I really enjoyed on your last individual solo album, and one of the things about it that at the time you were talking about how you wanted people to see you and you wanted to be a soul singer. Soul in the sense of telling something from the heart, something true. What about that song to you? I mean, it sounds like a soul song to me, but what about that song makes it soul for you?
Well, weirdly enough, it was the last song we recorded on the album. And it kind of came about, I think Joe and his wife, the night before I was staying at their house, took their daughter to a swimming gala and left me on my own with this house full of guitars, and I was just sitting on the sofa playing that lick. And by the time they come back, I'd written a song. And so we recorded it the next day, and there was just something about it. Joe's wife had left a book in my bedroom of Sufi poets, and kind of like there was something in there about, I read something in there about being like a guitar, well, like a string, you know, on an instrument. It might not have been a guitar, but it really resonated with me. But this was also the first record I'd made since my mum passed away. And I kind of thought to myself, I don't seem to have reflected that at all. And then even actually when we were down in the basement recording the song, after the first take, suddenly that line came in. You know, tidy up the place for Monday till she's buried in her dancing shoes. My mum went a lot of ballroom dance, that was her hobby. And when she died, we put her dancing shoes on top of the coffin. And that line came in and I thought, that's it, the album's finished. It got me to that place. And I ran upstairs, left Dave, the double bass player there, standing there. I said, wait. And went upstairs, come back down, okay, got the last verse. And we sang it in there. And it was a very, very important song to me because it then grounded the album, because it was recorded in California, which I don't normally do, more Americana based. And I'd also let Joe more or less tell me what to do, which is a strange experience for me. But that last line and that last song and that last experience kind of grounded it deeply in everything I'd been going through in the previous couple of years. And I was really pleased that it should end that way, that part of my experience, because the song was about moving on to the next thing, you know, and I think that's something that's why we made the record. You know, I said to my missus about 6 months before, you know, I've got to make another record. I've got to move on away from, not because I was sitting around moping about my mum passing away, but I just needed to get to the next thing, you know. And she said, ring up Joe. Joe said you could make an album in 5 days in his basement. I was like, yeah, right, that's going to happen. So when it did, it had happened. So that line, that song, right at the very end, kind of brought it all together. And it's a song, that's why we put it at the top of the album, so people would know where we are and where we're going.
Billy Bragg, thank you very much for your time.